They said only blood could claim the Blackwell fortune. What they didn't expect was that the bloodline buried deepest would come back to claim everything. The grandfather clock in Eleanor Blackwell's study ticked with merciless precision. As Jennifer stood frozen, the echo of her father's words slicing through the thick silence. "You're not even her real granddaughter," Douglas Blackwell spat, his face contorted in rage. "Only blood relatives deserve the family fortune." Jennifer's throat tightened. Her heart thundered beneath her ribs, drowning out the autumn wind, rattling the mansion's windows. The study, lined with dark oak shelves and the musky scent of old books, had once felt like a sanctuary. Now it bore witness to betrayal. She took a breath, her voice trembling but resolute. "What are you talking about?" Douglas's lip curled. "Don't play innocent, Jennifer. Your mother's little secret isn't so secret anymore." He gestured toward the formal portrait above the fireplace, a dignified painting of Eleanor Blackwell in her signature navy suit, a subtle smirk playing on her lips. Eleanor was obsessed with bloodlines. "Once the lawyer confirms you've got no Blackwell blood, you get nothing." The word struck like a whip. Jennifer's world had been built on the pillars of this family: tradition, pride, and legacy. Her identity was entwined with the name Blackwell. It was stitched into the monogrammed towels of her childhood, echoed in every introduction at gala events, and woven into every holiday at the mansion. "Do you promise to keep your word about this?" she asked, her gaze narrowing. "That only blood relatives deserve grandmother's inheritance." Douglas lifted his chin, with the same haughty grace he had always worn like a second skin. "Absolutely. I'll make sure the family legacy stays with real Blackwells, not imposters." Jennifer stared at him, the man she had called father for 27 years, the man whose approval had always remained out of reach, like a star she was never meant to touch. And now he claimed they shared no blood at all. She didn't cry. Not then. Instead, she walked slowly to her grandmother's desk, letting her fingers drift across the polished walnut surface. Here, Eleanor had signed checks, penned notes in her looping script, and reviewed her will, no doubt with the intention of justice and fairness. Jennifer clung to that belief like a lifeline. Her phone vibrated. A message from her mother lit the screen. "We need to talk about your father tonight." Alone, a chill prickled down her spine. If Douglas wasn't her father, then who was? And why? After all these years, was the truth surfacing now? Just days after her grandmother's funeral, and mere hours before the reading of the will. Growing up a Blackwell meant privilege and pressure. Jennifer had known both intimately. Her childhood had been adorned with ballet recitals and private theaters, European summer vacations, and holiday banquets so elaborate they made the front page of Philadelphia society pages. But behind every smile, behind every curated photo, there had been tension, especially between Jennifer and Douglas. He never yelled. He didn't need to. His disappointment cut sharper than any shouted word. She remembered him sighing after her acceptance letter to Columbia's history department. Not business, not law, not medicine, just history. She lacks the Blackwell drive, he once told her mother, unaware Jennifer was listening outside the study door. Too soft, too idealistic. Her brothers Thomas and William had followed the script. Thomas joined Douglas in the family pharmaceutical empire. William was graduating from Yale Law with honors. Jennifer had taken a different path, curating historical estates, preserving the past with delicate hands and a reverence inherited. She now realized, not from Douglas, but from Eleanor, who had always encouraged her, who once slipped her a signed first edition of Jane Eyre with a note that read, "Never forget, real strength isn't loud, it endures." The day of Eleanor's funeral had been a blur of black lace, condolence bouquets, and strained handshakes. Yet Jennifer couldn't forget the last time she'd visited her grandmother. Just a week before she passed, Eleanor had been in her favorite armchair, sunlight warming the delicate bones of her hands. "Trust your instincts, Jennifer," she had whispered, voice thin but eyes sharp. "Not everything is as it appears." At the time, Jennifer thought it was about work, or maybe about her toxic ex-boyfriend. Now, she wasn't so sure. That evening, She met her mother at a small cafe tucked in a quiet corner of the city, far from the grandeur of the Blackwell estate. Catherine looked older, paler. Her normally sleek hair was pinned hastily, and her wedding band twirled restlessly around her finger. "I never wanted you to find out this way," she said without preamble. "So it's true?" Jennifer asked, barely able to hear her voice over the din of her thoughts. "Douglas isn't my biological father?" Catherine nodded. "It's complicated. More than Douglas makes it seem." For the next hour, Jennifer sat motionless as the story unfolded like an old photograph finally developed. James Blackwell, Douglas's younger brother, the family rebel, the brilliant researcher who had walked away from the family business to pursue medical breakthroughs, the man who used to bring Jennifer rare fossils from his trips, the only person who had ever treated her like her voice mattered. He and Catherine had been in love once, deeply, before he left for a fellowship in Seattle. A long-distance relationship strained by ambition and expectation had created a fracture. In a vulnerable moment, Catherine had turned to Douglas, charming, ambitious Douglas. Then came Jennifer. "I always believed James was your father," Catherine confessed, eyes glossy with regret. "The timing fit. But by the time I found out, he was already engaged. Douglas stepped in, said he'd raise you as his own. He promised me stability. I thought I was protecting you." Jennifer sat numb. Every interaction, every dismissal, every subtle wow now made sense. "I wanted to tell you," her mother whispered, "so many times. But you were happy. Or I thought you were." Jennifer said nothing. There were no words. Not yet. The next morning, Jennifer sat across from James Blackwell in his modest apartment, surrounded by overflowing bookshelves and the smell of peppermint tea. At T58, James still carried a quiet charisma, a gentleness that contrasted sharply with Douglas's steel. "You seem troubled," he said. Jennifer met his eyes. Eyes she now suspected mirrored her own. "James, do you think I may be your daughter?" He didn't laugh, didn't deny it. Instead, his brow furrowed in thought. "I never knew Catherine was pregnant. When she married Douglas so suddenly, I assumed she'd moved on." Jennifer explained Douglas's recent revelation, the threat to her inheritance, the looming will. Reading. James paced slowly, absorbing every word. "If there's even a chance you're mine, Jennifer," he said, "we need to know. Not for the money, for the truth." They arranged for a private DNA test that very afternoon. As the samples were taken, Jennifer stared out the clinic window, watching the city blur beneath gray clouds. She had never imagined that a simple vial of saliva could carry so much weight, could contain the key to her past and possibly her future. James placed a hand on her shoulder. "Whatever the results, I'm here. You're not alone in this." For the first time in days, Jennifer believed him. While waiting for the results, Jennifer turned her focus to Eleanor's will. She contacted Bernard Walsh, Eleanor's attorney, a kind-eyed man with a precise voice who had always slipped her extra sugar cubes during tea. "I'm afraid I can't reveal the will's contents until the reading," Bernard said. "But I can assure you Eleanor was deliberate in her decisions. Her mind was sharp until the very end." "Did she know?" Jennifer asked. "About my real father?" Bernard hesitated. Eleanor Blackwell was remarkably perceptive. She knew more than most ever suspected. Jennifer left his office feeling both reassured and unnerved. That night, a storm swept across the city. Rain lashed against the windows of her apartment as she reread old letters from Eleanor, her grandmother's looping handwriting now taking on a prophetic tone. She was still reading when her phone buzzed. A new message from her mother. "Douglas knows you met with James. Be careful, Jennifer. When he feels threatened, he becomes dangerous." Jennifer's hands tightened around the phone. Whatever the DNA test revealed, she knew two things. Douglas was preparing for war, and she had no intention of losing. 2 days after her clandestine meeting with James Blackwell, Jennifer sat at her kitchen table staring at her phone screen. The email had arrived 5 minutes ago, and yet she hadn't opened it. The subject line, "DNA results, private and confidential," might as well have been a detonator. When she finally clicked the message open, her breath hitched as her eyes scanned for the conclusion buried in scientific jargon: probability of paternity 99.99998. Jennifer closed her eyes. Her fingers trembled. Her entire life, every strained smile from Douglas, every warm glance from James, every cryptic piece of wisdom from Eleanor clicked into place like puzzle pieces finally finding their fit. She was James Blackwell's daughter, and Eleanor Blackwell's granddaughter by blood. The implications exploded in her mind. Douglas's attempt to discredit her had failed spectacularly. If anything, his cruel ploy to eliminate her from the will had only reaffirmed her rightful claim. Jennifer immediately called James. "I have the results," she said, voice shaking. "Tell me. You're my father." Silence. Then a soft exhale, part relief, part wonder. "I suspected," James said, "but hearing it changes everything." They agreed to meet before the reading of Eleanor's will. Their conversation, though filled with warmth and shared emotion, quickly turned tactical. "You know Douglas won't back down," James warned. "He'll double down on trying to invalidate your claim." "We have DNA proof," Jennifer countered. "That should be enough, maybe. But we're dealing with more than inheritance. We're dealing with ego, legacy, and secrets people would kill to protect." Later that evening, Jennifer received a call from Harrison Mills, the family attorney and Douglas's longtime confidant. "I'd like to meet," he said. Before the reading, his tone was laced with fake courtesy. Jennifer agreed. The following morning, she entered Harrison's office. The scent of leather-bound books and polished wood was overwhelming. "Douglas is prepared to offer a settlement," Harrison began, sliding a crisp folder across the table. $250,000 in exchange for a signed waiver relinquishing your claim." Jennifer stared at the document. "This is hush money." "It's pragmatism," Harrison replied. "It spares the family a legal circus." "I'm not accepting," she said. "You're terrified of what we found, aren't you?" His jaw clenched. "You have no idea what you're tampering with." "I think I do." She left without signing and drove straight to James's apartment. "We need to escalate," she said. James nodded. "Because there's something you don't know." He retrieved a sealed envelope from a hidden compartment in a drawer. Inside were adoption records. His parents had adopted Douglas as an infant. James had found them among his late father's estate files. "Douglas isn't a blood Blackwell," James said, "which means, by his own standard, he's ineligible for the inheritance." Jennifer blinked. "He's not a Blackwell." James shook his head. "Eleanor knew. She told my mother she regretted keeping it secret. But they wanted Douglas to feel included." The twist was dizzying. "If we use this," Jennifer said slowly, "it will destroy him." James met her gaze. "He tried to destroy you first." The next 48 hours were a storm of legal preparation, emotional reflection, and cautious strategy. Jennifer knew they had the moral high ground, but she also knew the Blackwell family had a way of rewriting history in their favor. When she called Bernard Walsh to inform him of the development, his secretary answered with grim news: Bernard had been hospitalized with pneumonia. Jennifer's instincts screamed, sabotage. Someone was removing her allies. But Jennifer Blackwell was done being outmaneuvered. The day of the will reading dawned gray and cold. Jennifer arrived at the Blackwell mansion early, flanked by James. Her mother followed closely behind, a quiet pillar of strength. Inside the grand dining hall, the family gathered, Thomas and William looking uncertain, Douglas radiating icy confidence. Harrison Mills stood at the head of the table, the will open before him. "As you know," Harrison began, "Eleanor Blackwell's estate is subject to both her personal decisions and the provisions of the Blackwell Trust." He glanced at Douglas, who rose smoothly. "Before we proceed," Douglas said, "I must address a matter of eligibility. Recent tests confirm Jennifer is not my biological daughter. Therefore, she is not a direct descendant of the Blackwell line." He produced his DNA results, which Jennifer knew had been taken without her consent. "You stole my DNA," she said. Douglas shrugged. "The truth matters more than your feelings." Jennifer stood slowly. "Then let's talk about the truth." She revealed her test, proving James was her biological father, and Eleanor's bloodline continued through him. James then dropped the final bombshell. Douglas was adopted, he said. He has no Blackwell blood. Chaos erupted. But before Harrison could object, the library doors opened. Bernard Walsh entered, frail, but alive. Eleanor anticipated this, Bernard said. She left a letter for this exact moment. He opened the sealed document and read aloud Eleanor's words. To my family, if you are reading this, the truth has emerged. Douglas, you were raised as my son, but Jennifer is my blood. Let this be known. Those who manipulate truth to secure legacy shall lose both. The room fell into stunned silence. Eleanor's fortune, her power, her legacy were no longer in Douglas's hands. Douglas stood frozen as Bernard's words echoed through the hall. The truth, laid bare before his family, cut deeper than any betrayal. His face paled, and for a long moment, he looked not like the master of the Blackwell legacy, but a man stripped of everything. Jennifer watched in silence, her heart pounding in her chest, not from fear, but from the overwhelming surge of justice finally delivered. Douglas lunged forward, snatching the adoption documents off the table. These are lies, he spat. Fabrications meant to humiliate me. James remained calm. They're notarized, confirmed by estate attorneys. You've lived a lie. Douglas, not because of your origins, but because of the way you treated others. The tension in the room was electric. Thomas and William shifted uncomfortably. Harrison, visibly rattled, leaned toward Bernard. This changes everything, Bernard said firmly. According to Eleanor's instructions, and confirmed by the trust, Jennifer Blackwell is the sole blood heir of the Blackwell lineage. Douglas's hands trembled. She manipulated you. All of you. No, James replied. She uncovered what you tried to bury. The will reading continued. Eleanor had been meticulous in her provisions. Her estate valued at over $60 million was to be split, with 70% allocated to Jennifer, and the rest set in trusts for charity foundations she had supported throughout her life. James received a personal inheritance as her son, including a priceless art collection and a historic estate in Cape May. Douglas received nothing. A hush fell over the room. She named you, Bernard said to Douglas, only in this letter, as a cautionary example, not in her distribution documents. Harrison gathered his notes and stood, avoiding Douglas's eyes. I'll have my legal team challenge this, Douglas hissed at Jennifer as the room emptied. You're welcome to try, she replied. But this time, the truth is stronger than your influence. Later that evening, Jennifer returned to the study, the same room where her world had splintered. Now, it felt like the epicenter of a storm had finally passed. She sat at Eleanor's desk, tracing her fingers over the familiar polished wood. James entered, carrying 2 glasses of Eleanor's favorite sherry. He handed one to Jennifer and sat across from her. How are you holding up? He asked. Still processing, she admitted. It feels like I've gained and lost a father. In the same moment, James nodded, his gaze soft. I don't want to replace what you lost, but I would like to be here as a father, if you'll have me. Tears welled in her eyes. I'd like that too. They toasted not to victory, but to beginnings. In the weeks that followed, Douglas retreated from public life. Rumors swirled of offshore accounts, unpaid debts, even coercion. Harrison resigned from his firm and vanished from the city's legal scene. Thomas and William issued a public statement affirming their support for Jennifer, acknowledging the truth. Jennifer, meanwhile, took quiet control of the Blackwell legacy. She announced the formation of the Eleanor Foundation, an organization supporting education and women in historical and scientific fields. The press lauded her for her grace and strength in the face of scandal. At the mansion, life slowly settled. Jennifer moved into Eleanor's private quarters, keeping the study intact. On the mantel, she placed a framed photograph of Eleanor, her younger self beaming beside a baby James, a legacy finally reclaimed. One morning, while organizing documents in Eleanor's attic, Jennifer discovered a locked chest. Inside were letters, hundreds of them written between Eleanor and her sister, a woman Jennifer had never heard mentioned. The letters hinted at yet another secret, one that stretched across decades and continents. Jennifer froze as she held the final envelope, addressed to her in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting. My dearest Jennifer, if you are reading this, then you have proven stronger than I ever dared hope. But your journey is not over yet. There is one more truth buried beneath our family's gilded history. Follow the map enclosed. Trust no one but yourself. E.B. Jennifer's breath caught. The story wasn't over. The attic air was musty and cool, filled with the quiet scent of cedar, old papers, and the whispers of time. Jennifer held the letter tightly, its words seared into her mind. Eleanor had left more than an estate, she had left a final mystery, and perhaps another heir. She unfolded the old map tucked inside the envelope. The parchment was yellowed, the ink faded but legible. A series of coordinates, handwritten notes in Eleanor's looping script, and the unmistakable stamp of the Blackwell crest marked the surface. James stepped into the attic just as Jennifer was examining the back. You found something? He asked. Jennifer nodded and handed him the map. Eleanor knew everything, and apparently there's more. James studied it carefully. These coordinates, they point to Ireland. County Clare, if I'm not mistaken. Jennifer's eyes widened. She never mentioned any connection to Ireland. She wouldn't have. But Eleanor traveled there in her 20s. She never spoke about it, said it was a summer of mistakes and miracles. That night, Jennifer scoured the letters from Eleanor to her sister Marguerite. Many were mundane updates about weather, politics, family tensions, but a few hinted at something deeper. A child, a loss, a promise. One line stood out. I still see her eyes in the mirror, green as the Irish coast. I left her to keep her safe, but I never stopped wondering. Jennifer's mind reeled. She didn't just mean James, she whispered. She meant another daughter. By the end of the week, Jennifer and James were on a plane to Ireland. The official story was a sabbatical to research family history for the Eleanor Foundation. The real reason was coded in Eleanor's last letter and in Jennifer's racing heartbeat. County Clare welcomed them with blustery winds and green fields that rolled endlessly into the Atlantic. Guided by the map, they followed winding rural roads to a seaside village called Kilvaneen. Their destination, an abandoned manor house perched on a cliff. Jennifer felt it before she saw it, a strange weight in her chest. The gate creaked open, revealing a stone path choked with ivy. Inside the manor, time had stood still. Dust coated the furniture, but framed photos still hung on the walls. One of them, unmistakably a young Eleanor holding a newborn wrapped in tartan. In the fireplace was a sealed tin box. Inside, a second letter from Eleanor. To the one who found this. If you are Jennifer, then you are stronger than I ever was. If you are her, then you're brave beyond measure. I left my daughter here with a woman I trusted, Maeve Brennan. She was adopted in secret, named Shalban. I visited every year until the guilt overcame me, but I never stopped loving her. I hope, if fate is kind, she found happiness. Eleanor. Jennifer's hand trembled. She had a daughter. I have an aunt or a cousin, someone whose blood, someone who doesn't know. The village records led them to a local historian, Padraig Connolly, a sharp-eyed old man. He took one look at the photo Jennifer showed him and whistled. That's little Shalban, he said. Grew up with the Brennans on the orchard farm. She left for London in the 90s. Married. Became a teacher, I think. Real hard for kids. Jennifer's pulse quickened. Do you know where she is now? He scribbled an address and phone number on a torn page from his notebook. 2 days later, Jennifer stood outside a red brick house in Islington, London, her heart in her throat. James waited in the car. She rang the bell. A woman in her late 40s answered, graceful, composed, with familiar green eyes. Yes, she asked. Jennifer swallowed. My name is Jennifer Blackwell. I believe we might be family. Shalban invited her in, skeptical but curious. The two sat across from each other, a pot of tea between them. As Jennifer explained the story, Eleanor, the letters, the will, the DNA, the inheritance, and the map, Shalban listened in silence. When Jennifer finished, Shalban opened a drawer and pulled out a box. Inside, an old photograph, a lock of hair, and a letter from Eleanor addressed to my darling Xiaobon. She visited until I was 5, Xiaobon said. I remember her perfume, her stories. Then she stopped coming. I always thought she died. Tears welled in Jennifer's eyes. She never stopped loving you. I believe that now. They embraced, two strangers linked by blood, loss, and a matriarch who had stitched her legacy in letters and secrets. Returning to Philadelphia, Jennifer updated the Eleanor Foundation's charter. Xiaobon was named a founding board member. James smiled as the two women worked side by side in the library, one rediscovering family, the other reclaiming it. Weeks later, Jennifer found a final letter tucked in a book in Eleanor's collection. My dear Jennifer, blood matters. Yes, but it is choice that defines us. You chose the truth. You chose compassion. And for that, I leave you my most precious legacy. The future. Don't guard the gates. Open them. With all my love, Eleanor. Jennifer placed the letter in a glass frame beside Eleanor's portrait. The Blackwell legacy was no longer defined by secrets, power, or blood, but by the courage to face all three and build something stronger.